All right, so Netflix appears to be getting just a wee bit desperate when it comes to The Witcher. If you look at this chart from Google Trends, which I wanted to go check on Google Trends and just map it out, but you can see how interest in the fantasy show has waned considerably since season one. Even in season two, it had gone down quite a bit, but by season three, it's like barely a blip on the radar. Nobody's talking about The Witcher. Nobody seems that enthusiastic, either in a good or bad way. It's not getting a lot of hate. It's not getting a lot of love. It's just not getting a lot of anything at all, which isn't great and may explain why Netflix has posted these images to social media of words beamed to various landmarks across the UK that say, "He's still Geralt, The Witcher, Season 3. This is quite a marketing play to remind audiences that Henry Cavill, is not leaving yet. He's not out of the picture yet. In the currently airing season of The Witcher, he is still the titular character, Geralt of Rivia. And not only does this smack of desperation, and not only is this kind of pathetic, but it also throws the new Geralt, played by Liam Hemsworth, directly under the bus. It's crazy, almost unthinkable that a marketing team would think it's okay to kind of cast shade at really at everybody. It's basically saying, hey guys, the one person that matters is still here. No offense to literally everyone involved in this. No offense to Freya Allen or Anya Shalata or Joey Beatty or any of the other fine actors in this show. No offense to Liam Hemsworth, who's coming in next season. I mean, how are they planning on marketing this next season? Well, he's not Geralt anymore, but this dude, he might work. It's just kind of sad. And it didn't have to be this way. I mean, what are the problems that we can identify with The Witcher on Netflix? I think partly they're production related, like sometimes it just feels very cheap. Sometimes the costumes look cheap, and that's been the case since season one. Sometimes the editing feels quite jarring, especially in season three. But I think a lot of it is also down to the writing, which has been really hit or miss. I think partly it's not just abandoning the source material; it's abandoning sort of the spirit of the source material. Obviously, CD Projekt Red and their video games did not adapt the source material, but took those worlds and those characters and made them their own. And you can just tell that they were trying very hard to take the spirit of the books and short stories and translate those into a video game setting using, unique and new material, but keeping it true to the characters and the story from the books. There are obviously changes, artistic changes there as well beyond just the narrative changes. I think that both in the show and in the games, Geralt of Rivia is much more handsome than he's portrayed in the books. And that's okay because it's a visual medium and I understand. And I think those kinds of changes really make sense and work. What doesn't work is stuff like making the continent based on the Polish mythology and lore so diverse that it might as well just be, Brooklyn or LA. This is what I would call diversity 2.0, corporate diversity, or basically Americanization of other cultures. I think we have this tendency in America to want to make the whole world look just like us, and that's just not how the world is. Now, before people get mad at me for saying, "Well, you don't want black people, you don't want brown people in this series." No, that's not it at all. I think if you're going to make a fantasy series that takes place in a medieval setting, you have to have a much more careful approach to diversity. However, if you're going to have, let's say Yennefer, who's slightly darker skinned, not that dark, but darker skinned. You should have where she comes from and her people in that area basically look like her, because these are not cultures that had a lot of cross-pollination. I was looking at images of the main characters from Netflix's prequel series, The Witcher Blood Origins, and there's an Asian woman, a black woman, and a white man. And I was thinking, okay, so this is Polish fantasy. So if we were to make an African fantasy, would these three characters be appropriate for this African, like a medieval Africa or a medieval China, would this still be okay? And if not, why? Because isn't that the end goal of this particular diversity movement? Not to have an array of diverse stories, but just to have everyone in every scene, in every movie, in every TV show look essentially the same. Isn't that? I mean, it seems to me that that's the goal. Now, it occurred to me as I was thinking about this video, I've wanted to talk about comments made by director Taika Waititi, which I thought were right on point. And he said, and during a speech where he talked about diversity, he said, "We're mistaking diversification for we have to include a person from every single race and every single background and every single part of the human experience in every show or everything that we make," he said. "That's not reality and it's not authentic. I never grew up with a group of friends where there was someone who represented every ethnic group in my group of friends. I don't know who the hell grew up like that." He said instead that we should decolonize the screen. And what he meant by that is that we need to have more shows and movies made by people who aren't white about stories that are from other cultures. So not just like a white guy makes a show about, a fantasy African show or whatever, but people from Africa make that show, right? Or people from, indigenous groups make shows about indigenous people. And I think that is right on point. I think that's the kind of diversity we need to see. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have diversity at all. But, if you're making a TV show about, let's say, okay, so I've lived in a lot of places. When I was young, I lived in Montana. And there were almost, in my hometown of Bozeman, Montana, when I was young, there were very few people who weren't white. There were, I did have one friend, I think, when I was very young, who was a girl who was black, who my dad was a teacher and her dad was a teacher or something. And I don't remember. It's been a long time. But it wasn't very diverse. But then we moved to Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, if you'd made a TV show about my friends in British Columbia, there would have been maybe not a perfectly, diverse group. But I mean, I had friends who were white. One of my best friends was from Mexico City. One of my best friends was from Tokyo, Japan, and didn't even speak English. Like, I had a very diverse group of friends in Vancouver. And it would be very realistic in a show about where I lived then, which was on campus at UBC, to be diverse. It would be weird if it wasn't. So it's all about context, right? And I really do think, like, look at Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones did such a good job for many seasons staying not only true to the text, but true to what the text, to the context itself, right? Like, Westeros is not a super diverse place. Like, obviously, in large cities like King's Landing, you're going to find merchants from all over the world, and there is diversity. But, the noble houses of Westeros that have been there for hundreds of years are not going to be, populated by just like tons of characters of all different colors. And if they had done that, how would they have represented the people of the East? They would have just looked the same. And then we lose, again, once you just make everyone look the same, even if, same means there's black and white, brown and what. If everyone just looks the same, then you start, especially in the context of a historical fantasy or historical fiction or whatever, you start to lose a sense of internal logic, a sense of plausibility, a sense of realism. And those things, they do matter. People say, well, why does it matter? There's these monsters and dragons and all that. Why can you accept that, but you can't accept that this village, in Redania has a bunch of, black and Asian and white. Well, because I can accept a lot of things in fantasy, but I can't just accept everything. Sorry, somebody was saying in the comments on another one of my videos, like, that, well, why can't we just have, like, somebody show up in a Mercedes-Benz then? Why can't somebody just drive in a tractor? Like, what, why aren't there just dudes flying around with jetpacks and laser guns, taking down these monsters? Well, that's because it doesn't make sense in this context. And I think, you have to, it is important to have representation in media. I 100% believe this. But it's also important to tell true stories, like stories that are true to what you're trying to, obviously, this is not a true story in the sense of, like, it actually happened, but a story that is true in that it conveys some truth to the audience. And to do that, like in an adaptation like The Witcher, you don't have to adapt it one to one. You don't have to tell these stories exactly. But if you're going to set out to adapt the books, which is what this show did, then you should just adapt the books. That's what Game of Thrones did really well. Obviously, there were changes, but they did that very well until they ran out of material to work with, unfortunately. And they made some mistakes, but they tried. Lord of the Rings. I don't agree with everything Peter Jackson did, not by a long shot, but I think he really tried to adapt them faithfully. But The Witcher, there's very little. They could have just said we're making new stories. These aren't the books. We're just going to make new Geralt stories, and that would have been fine. But they didn't. And so not only have they not portrayed the continent and these kingdoms, the northern kingdoms, Nilfgaard and all that, with any sort of faithfulness to the setting or the context, but they have done a poor job at adapting the source material or of telling new stories to fit in the source material. They've ruined characters like Yennefer, who should be much more capable and less faithless. I mean, Yennefer is sort of schemy and all that, but she's a powerful, powerful sorceress. An extremely strong female character, and I don't know what it is about these incomprehensible shows that seem to at once have a social agenda, pushing all these weird social ideas, like the sorceress is just not being beautiful is very strange to me. But also like kneecapping their strongest main character, basically, like female character. Like I don't get it. Anyways, I could just ramble on and on and on about this, and I don't care that they didn't follow the source material perfectly, but if they're going to adapt the books, just adapt the books. And if you're going to create this world, why not create a world that feels real, that feels like this world? You don't have to. Pretty soon, every fantasy is just going to look and feel the same, and I think that it's this push towards diversity at all costs, token diversity, not real diversity, that's going to do that. And that's why I bring up like an African fantasy and a Chinese fantasy. If the real goal is that we have to have a person of each color in every show, then pretty soon any show about, the logical conclusion is that every show from every culture, every story from every culture, everything that's adapted from every culture will eventually just look the same. Diversity paved the road to a homogeneous and boring gray. Whereas I think a much better approach would be to tell a multitude of stories from all sorts of backgrounds. I still think I just would love to see something based on, a fantasy based on African lore, an epic fantasy. It wouldn't have to be I don't know, something along the lines of a Lord of the Rings or whatever, but with that setting and those myths and those creatures and all the things that come out of that, and obviously Africa's a big place, so I'm using broad strokes here, but I think that could be so cool. Why aren't we doing that? Because it's not safe, and these companies are not willing to take risks. They're not willing to take risks in any direction, and they're taking the easy road in every way, and so that's why we get a situation where Netflix is posting that he's still Geralt in season 3, because they have failed so hard at doing something that should have been a slam dunk, and I don't know. There's a part of me that sort of hates even making videos like this, because I know that there are people who are genuinely just racist, who don't want to see black people in their shows or whatever, and that's not what I'm saying. I just think we need to have some internal consistency, some internal logic. We need to create worlds that feel real. And we need to follow, if we're going to adapt stuff, adapt it. Like, you have other things. You have, like the D&D movie. That had diversity in it. Well, it's based on Forgotten Realms, which just doesn't even have, obviously it's a D&D thing, so it's all kinds of people from everywhere. It doesn't, you're not abandoning truth or the source material when you make a movie like that. That actually was quite faithful. It was remarkable, actually. But these shows could be stronger if there was just more internal consistency, more devotion to actually following the source material or the spirit of the source material. And we wouldn't find ourselves in these situations, and maybe Henry Cavill wouldn't be leaving the show. That's my 2 cents. Thank you for watching. Thank you for putting up with me rambling. Be sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. Peace.